Learning our cultural competencies. So we're going to get started in about 1 minute. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for joining our webinar. We're going to get started in about 1 minute. Just let me know if you're on the computer or if you're on a phone.
I'm actually on the phone, but I'm able to see but I'm on the web, so I'm able to see the presentation you have one.
Okay, perfect. All right, great. So if I could ask you just to keep your microphones muted, just
Sure.
so you don't get noise interference. And if you have a question, you're welcome to unmute your microphone and pop right in with the question. Or you have a chat window somewhere there on your phone or on the computer. You can type in a question to me privately or to the entire
No problem.
So today we're going to talk about some issues related to cultural competency. And I'm going to review some brief stages of cultural adjustment. So let's go ahead and get started. And you should be able to see a purple screen at the moment that says Cultural Reentry Host Family Webinar Series. My name is Madeleine Monaghan and I work with EduBoston, and I'm one of the trainer and professional development personnel at EduBoston. So I'm happy to do this webinar for you today. And a brief issue about housekeeping. You just told me, if you cannot see the screen, type in the chat if you can or cannot see the screen, and I'm happy to read things as we go along. But there's very little to read on the screen. And in the interest of noise, just keep your microphone muted. And if you have a question, just let me know. So let's jump right in. And the cultural competency areas that we're going to talk about today are relevant to students who are over the age of 14 and up to young adults. So I just wanted to give you an age range for what we're talking about today. And what I want to review with you today, now, for those of you that are host families who are currently hosting students, you would have read about this in your host family guidebook or at our EduBoston host family training. But I wanted to do a quick review of the cultural adjustment phases that your students go through. But one of my focuses today is of cultural reentry. So if you have the student that has gone home for the winter break or is going home for February break, what actually happens to them when they come back to the US after they've completed their first trip back home. And that's a huge issue for these students when it comes to cultural adjustment. So let's do a quick review of the initial few stages that they go through. So the first stage that happens is the honeymoon stage. They then move into culture shock stage. They then transition to recovery and adaptation. So those are the 4 stages that they're going to go through in the first few months of living with us here in the US. But when they then visit their native country and they return, they have a big phase to go through, which is reverse culture shock. And that's primarily the focus of today's quick webinars. I won't be keeping you longer than half an hour. For those of you that have just joined us, please feel free to jump in and ask questions, or you can type them on the screen on your webinar. And if you could, during the webinar, just keep your microphone muted so we don't have any noise pollution. But if you want to jump in and ask a question, please unmute your microphone and I'll happily take the question. So on the screen now, you should be seeing a purple screen, and we're going to quickly review the honeymoon phase. And when your student first comes out here, they're certainly curious and excited, and they're generally more enthusiastic and energetic. And now this honeymoon phase can literally last the airplane ride and they arrive in the US and start crying, or it can last all the way through orientation and then they start crying when they meet their host family. But one of the key words I want you to remember from this particular slide is the word infectious, that the student's energy is infectious. And during the honeymoon phase, we have excited host families, and the host families might do things like introduce the student to the entire extended family, bring them to the movies, show them around a little bit, take them for ice cream, go to the museum. So generally there's a sense of energy and enthusiasm here in the honeymoon phase that can slowly dissipate and disappear. But remember the keyword infectious, because I am going to come back to that. The student then transitions into what we typically call culture shock. And why this happens is because the student is really struggling with learning how to use their English. They're trying to figure out how to interact with people in authority. And, sometimes our Asian students can have different levels of respect for different levels of people. So for teachers or principals, they might have display different levels of respect. For male or female people in the family, they may respect a male parent over a female parent. So they may struggle with that here in the US, where we tend to have a more equal sense of people in authority, like both parents in the family might be in charge as opposed to just one. They're really not sure how to make friends. And we surveyed the Chinese and the other Asian kids that come out here, and we asked them what's the most difficult thing about living here. And they all tell us, trying to butt into the American conversation and make friends with American kids is really hard for them. So they really struggle with that. And they miss their friends at home too. They don't know how to date other people. We certainly have a big chunk of Chinese kids who are not permitted to date in high school by their own parents, but they are certainly trying to get used to seeing American kids in high school holding hands and dating publicly, because that's generally not done in Chinese high schools. So they may struggle with that. They might actually see kids making out after school. You never know. And it can be shocking for them. And that's part of culture shock. They're not sure how to express themselves. So they're going to feel a little bit muted. And I have moved here from another country. I came from Ireland. And even though English is my first language, I sometimes will feel reluctant to speak up and express my opinion, because I feel sometimes that Irish people think completely differently from American people. But I certainly feel muted when I'm living in a different culture. And that's very, very relevant for these kids when English is not their first language. So, on the surface, they're getting used to the foods and the eating customs. And we have ongoing webinars on food and how to feed your Chinese kid and what's different for them. And that's a really interesting webinar to jump into. So please join us on that in a few weeks' time, because it's very important. But the food is very different. And I have been to China. And when I'm over there, I really don't eat as much because I don't like their food. So it certainly works both ways. Many of our Chinese students don't have religion in China. It's not permitted to practice religion over there, so they can find that very strange. And even if you have a student who may have a Christian background, they may not be familiar with the extent of volunteer work that comes along with religion here. They're certainly not prepared for how much religion permeates the American lifestyle. It tends to be everywhere. There's certainly a lot of churches everywhere, and they're beautiful, big, obvious churches, so they're not used to that. They're obviously going to find massive differences with the educational system. And we do have webinars on the classroom cultural differences that we have between the US and many other countries in the world, not just China. So please join us on that webinar. But that's massive too. Just getting the kids used to using their lockers is really tough for them. They are going to find that people are impatient with them because they have a funny accent or because their English is slow. So they may meet Americans who say, go fix your English. And they're not ready for that. And that's part of culture shock. They're going to find out that people are prejudiced against them, and they were not aware of those prejudices in their native country. So I'm from Ireland, as I said, and everybody assumes that I drink and I'm Catholic and I fight. And I hear that all the time, and I've been here 20 years. Never stops. So no, I don't drink, just so you know. But the Chinese kids it might be assumed that they're good at math, that they're good at basketball if they're tall and skinny, things like that. They're not used to that. So they're going to have a lot of different feelings when they come during that adjustment phase. And that can last, a pretty long time. If they get here in August, they could be feeling anxious and homesick and lonely and helpless for several months, September, October, November, feeling that they don't belong. And then confused about which values to live by. Should they act more American, or should they act more Chinese or Vietnamese or more Irish? How should they act? So this is a very confusing time for these kids, and they may even struggle with whether they should stay the full 4 years or go back home. So a lot of issues to deal with. They're also going to have to learn how to deal with other Chinese kids. So the assumption is that all the Chinese kids would be happy working together. Well, that's not the case. They may not like to talk to other Chinese kids from different parts of China. They may struggle with that. I mean, that's always the assumption we make, right? I meet people all the time that ask me, do I know the Irish person that lives on such and such a street? And no, I don't. But people assume that I'm connected with other Irish people, which is not necessarily true. So that culture shock phase transitions to adaptation. So, around October, November, you're starting to see a student who is understanding the differences between both countries and appreciates both cultures. But they tend to become a little bit more mature and flexible and confident. So when you look at the word flexibility, you're going to now have a student in your home who tends to be more flexible, like, yeah, I can wait for a ride, or, works with you regarding rides here and there, or food preparation or things like that. You're going to see a little bit more flexibility, and that's a significant indicator that the student is moving into the adaptation phase. So remember, our key word from the honeymoon phase is infectiousness. Our key word from the adaptation phase is flexibility. They definitely give a sense of flexibility. And now they move into the recovery phase, where they get really handling things very, very well. But the big thing I want you to remember with the recovery phase is the student's going to be aware of external and internal resources. And what that means, what internal resources means, is that student's going to be very aware of what they need to do for themselves to chill out or relax. So you might see a student saying, I'm going to go chill out in my room or watch a movie for a couple of hours and I'll come back down for dinner. A student that says, I need to phone my family, or I need to reach out to the teacher. I know who to contact at the school. So you're going to see a student who's more aware of their internal resources and external resources. I'm going to log into Google Classroom to get this done. I'm going to go to the library for a minute. So that's a student who's generally in the recovery phase, where they're definitely getting a better sense of how they can help themselves get through struggling issues. So that's a review of those first 4 stages of culture shock. But the key symptoms I want you to remember are infectiousness from honeymoon, and then flexibility from the adaptation phase. And in the recovery phase, we're seeing the students use the resources that are available to them. So let's just remember those key points. Now we're going to talk about what it's like to have reverse culture shock. So now you've got a student, up to December, who's really getting with the program, is getting organized with you, is going with the flow in the family, and then they go home for 10 days. And what happens is they've become comfortable with the American culture, but now they've flopped back into their native culture, and they definitely hit, and they're not prepared for reverse culture shock. So when they go home to China, they have major issues. And let's look at the theoretical issues that happen. Our theoretical definition of reverse culture shock, excuse me, is the students that go home are not really ready to deal with the differences that they feel. They're going to feel very different when they go home. This is a different kid that goes home. But the home members, the family at home and the friends at home, may not realize that their student is coming home a different person. So if any of you have lived abroad and you've then returned home, you're a very different person, not just for vacation abroad, but actually living abroad for a month or 2 months. You definitely feel like a different person. So if we look at the theoretical definition, culture shock is primarily a set of emotional reactions to the loss of perceptual reinforcement from one's own culture. So everything I've grown up with, everything I was used to growing up, has now changed. So the loss of perceptual reinforcements to the new cultural stimuli, which have little or no meaning to the understanding of the experiences. So I'm feeling like, why on earth am I feeling like this? Because I've moved to the States. I wasn't ready for it. But the feelings that happen with reverse culture shock are, helplessness, irritability. But let's focus on these 2 words, cheated and contaminated. So what I mean by cheated is, when I've gone back home to my native country, I've missed out on birthday celebrations and possibly funerals. And, my parents redid the kitchen. My mother learned a new recipe. My father has a new job. I've missed out on things. So I definitely have a sense of being cheated. And the other thing that I might feel is a certain amount of contamination. I'm feeling more American. I may wave my hands around more. I might do something that acts more American than when I left. So certainly when I go to Ireland, my Irish family think I look and sound American, but living here, everybody here thinks I look and sound Irish. So I'm struggling between, I don't struggle, but I straddle those 2 cultures, and I feel reverse culture shock all the time, every time I go back to Ireland to visit. So what happens at home is, sometimes the parents can be resentful that the students have changed especially if there's big differences between the cultures. And we certainly see big differences between the Chinese culture and the American culture. Typically, Chinese people tend not to be as expressive as American people. They don't use their hands when they're talking. They might not smile when they're talking. So now parents might have a student that comes back that is acting a bit more overt and smiles more. So that can be different. Their friends can be jealous. You know, here's something that we haven't really expected, but the actual student's personal best friends can now look at them and be jealous. So the student is going to go back home and say, oh, in America we do this, or in Boston we do this. Well, that could cause jealousy. You never know. And that might be something they're not expecting. They might be expecting everybody to be super happy for them. They can just feel a little bit lost, for sure. And they can start to compare, right? You know, in America, this is better. In China, this is better. I was talking to a Chinese kid last week, and I said, you know, what's the biggest difference that you noticed when you went home? And they said, you know, their apartment in China is super clean and modern and nice, and it's tiny, but it's very modern and up to date. And in Massachusetts, she lives in a house that's, you know, 80 years old, and everything's creaky and the windows are cracked and it's cold and drafty. And she said, you know, she really likes being home because she feels like she's in a modern environment, but then she loves the antiques of the house where she's living. So she's conflicted about what she likes best. So I thought that was an interesting comment from her. So the students can feel lonely. As I said, they feel a bit cheated that they've missed out on things, and they're not sure where they fit in at home anymore because they're not feeling like the same person. So it's very difficult. And it's hard to prepare students for that before they go back home. They really aren't ready for that. So when they come back, so they've spent a few days at home with their parents, maybe talking about the old creaky house that they're living in, but their parents could say to them something like, you know, that you shouldn't be living in an old house. You shouldn't be driving in an old car. You shouldn't be taking an old bus to school. So sometimes when they come back, they can kind of feel resentful a bit for the American stuff, and they feel alienated and withdrawn again when they come back in January. And at a time like this, the student's going to struggle with all of these emotions, and they will need a lot more sleep. So your student that has just come back over Christmas break, or if they're heading out in February, they're going to need a lot more sleep when they come back because their brain has to kind of readjust. And in addition, you know, for those of you on this webinar who are on the East Coast, it's dark and dreary and wet and cold, and nobody wants to go outside, and there's no sunlight. These students need a lot of sunlight to keep up their good moods. So get them out in the sun, get them out walking it, and during the daytime if you can, and especially on weekends, get them outside and get some light into them. But they may struggle with talking again because they spent the last 10 to 15 days yakking away in their native language. So now they're kind of getting back up to speed with English again. And they may start to feel that other people don't understand them again, and that's a real struggle. So they're going to feel like they're muted again, which was what happened in the honeymoon period when they first got here. But during the honeymoon period, there was an energy and an excitement and a novelty about it, and everything was infectious, but they don't have that honeymoon period again. So they can really kind of get depressed about it all. Now, when they come back, the physical changes that affect them are very simple things, just the noise levels. It might be very quiet where they live in Massachusetts. The weather, the sunlight, they can certainly react to the shock of racial makeup again of the population. So what I mean by that is, when I go to China, you see nothing but Chinese people. So these kids from China have grown up where they've only ever seen people that look like them. So when they come to the US, we are all different colors, all different races, all different cultures. You know, if you ever walk into a Brazilian deli, you're going to see people speaking Portuguese who are every color. Every size, every shape. It's incredible. And it's a real shock to the system when you first come to the States to see the massive difference in racial makeup, where you just don't have that. In Ireland, everybody kind of looks the same, and in China, everybody kind of looks the same. But that can shock them all over again. Now, in the honeymoon period, they had that energy and excitement, and everything was kind of wonderful. But they don't have that honeymoon period at the moment. So it can definitely hit them again. And just simple smells. When they were home, they were again enjoying grandma's cooking or dad's cooking or mom's cooking, and the home smells that you're used to, and now they're coming back into the host family, and the smells might affect them differently. They might be actually turned off with the smell of foods that the host family is enjoying. Now, they did get used to it, right? They got used to the smell of lasagna bacon, or they got used to the smell of that, but that was during the honeymoon period. Now they have to get used to it again without the honeymoon period, so it's tough. And pacing of life is different. Many of our Asian kids are from only have one kid in the family, maybe a youngster, maybe a second sibling who's younger or very much older. So they may be the center of attention there. Many of our host families might have a couple of kids in the house, and it's hectic and it's busy and everyone's going to work in the morning. So the pacing of life is different. So they may kind of go back to having struggles with the schedule. Like you may need to drop off one kid, then drop off another kid, and they may struggle with that again. And as a host family, I hear host families in this phase in January say to their kids, well, wait a minute, we sorted this out back in September. You were fine with this. What's the issue? So the issue is actually reverse culture shock hitting them like a ton of bricks when they come back. So be aware of that. Now, here's what happens with their language acquisition. So they struggled with their English September, October, November. They got up to speed. They got used to the English in the host family. And then they went home. But what happened for the 10 days at home is that they were talking very, very fluently in their native language. And they're able to express themselves completely. There's no muting whatsoever. They've been babbling away at home. And they come back in January, and it really hits them how much more English they have to learn. So they kind of the uphill struggle September, October, November, they're getting, there's some kind of inertia building there as they go up that struggle up a hill. And then when they go home, they realize, oh my gosh, I don't get to talk as fluently like this in English. So it can really be depressing as a second language learner for you to return after that first trip home in the reverse culture shock phase. It can be super depressing because you begin to realize, oh my gosh, I have so much more work to do. So what I ask the host families to do is keep the subtitles on the TV. If you're a family that kind of watches TV together or watches the news together, keep the subtitles on there so that they can follow along. Make sure your student is using audiobooks every single day. That is absolutely critical to their language acquisition. Bring them to the local library and pick up some audiobooks, whether it's a CD or if they can purchase the book on Audible, Audible, which is that phone app for audiobooks. It's really important. But I want the students to listen and read at the same time. Not just listen to the audiobook, but listen and read. So if they purchase the Harry Potter book on Audible, they're also going to be looking at the physical book that they've picked up in the library. Super important, but it's great for their language acquisition. I want the host families to praise the kids' English specifically. So instead of saying, oh, I think your English is getting better, I think you're improving, that's too vague. I would like you to praise the students specifically and say, oh, I liked the way you asked that question. That sentence was perfect. That word you use, that's a new word. I haven't heard you use that word before. I can see that English is growing. The vocabulary is growing. So be specific with your praise. And that really helps give them the hooks that they can hook onto and feel good about their process of English. But you're going to have to come out with those compliments a lot more when they come back from China in January. Keep up with social interactions. Have the students, maybe as a family, every other week or every month, you can go bowling or go to the movies or something like that. Keep up with regular social interactions so that student, the first time you bring your student bowling, they're not going to speak much. The second time, they're going to get used to the vocabulary. And the third time you do it, they're going to be much more talkative. So keep up with those social interactions. And I really, really like bowling as a family event because I'm terribly bad at it, but I can still have fun. And sometimes I accidentally win. And that was completely by accident. But I think it's a great mixed activity for these students to do with their host family. So if you've got a bowling alley near you, it's really worth it to give it a try. Keep up with some games, like maybe one night a week you've got Scrabble, Guess Who, some kind of games that you can do, board games. Not Monopoly because it's a bit too long, but the games that I like for the students are Connect Four, Guess Who, Scrabble. What's the other one? I'll think of it in a second. But there's a few good games that they like that are quick. They love Uno. the students, because we do that a lot in orientation. So, you know, find some card games that you guys like to do together. And you could ask the students to show you pictures of what they did when they were home, of their family, and maybe make a photo album or write some journals with them. If you've got an electronic photo album on your wall, maybe add some pictures of the Chinese kids' family in China on your wall or on your fridge, just so that they can feel that they're kind of part of that. And that really helps. And then, you know, let them keep in touch, obviously, with their new and old friends, and maybe, you know, make some connections yourself with their friends over there. One of the things I like the students to do is to become a teacher to other students about their experience. So I sometimes ask the program managers or the schools to see if they can bring those older Chinese kids into the school so that they can talk about their experiences, or maybe teach Chinese to elementary school kids in an after school program. That would be kind of cool. And that gets them out of their kind of depression that can kick in with reverse culture shock in January. So, you know, when you come back, somehow think about what you did in the honeymoon period and try and recreate those activities. Remind them of their resources. So their internal and their external resources. Keep up with the regular activities. Make time for English only activities. And I use this in many of the host families and also with the classrooms. You can use a traffic light symbol. And if the traffic light symbol in the kitchen is set to red, it means we're all going to speak Chinese, or the host family is going to learn some Chinese from the student. If it's set to orange, we're going to primarily speak in English, but if the student wants something translated, they can ask for help with translation. And then if it's set to green, it's English only at this kitchen table tonight. So maybe Monday night and Wednesday night and Friday night, if you're a family that eats together, you could set the traffic light to green, and then on other nights it's set to red. But that means that you're going to learn some Chinese from your student, and that's a really good thing to do. So make time for that native and the second language and talk about how they feel. If possible in your home, if you could have the student cook some of their own food, so bring them to a Chinese supermarket. Everything's written in Chinese, but have them pick out some product that they want to cook. And bring them into the kitchen a little bit to share their food. And there's a picture of the traffic light symbol, which I can email you. But I have it printed up in giant size in my kitchen, and I kind of put a marker on it when it's English only or it's going to be Chinese. And that gives them a sense of inclusion in your family. So see if those activities work for you. Now, if they go home for if they're here in August and they spend September, October, November here, December, and then they go home in December, you're going to have reverse culture entry shock for sure. If they're only abroad for a couple of weeks, it's not going to be an issue. And generally, if you're abroad for vacation, you don't have reverse culture shock. It is my preference that kids do not return home at all for the first 9 months, that they stay continuously for those 9 months. And that's hard to do. Many of them want to go home, and many times their parents want them to go home. But as a rule, EduBoston tends to recommend, please stay for the first 9 to 10 months, because then you've got a student who's much more confident, mature, and flexible overall, and they can adjust much more easily. Now, the last point I want to make is many teenagers, whether they're American or Chinese or anything, use masks to cover what they're actually feeling. So when I talk about masks, if I want you to think about the eyeball roll, if you ask your teenage kid, okay, get the vacuuming done, I need help. You get the big eyeball roll and the big sigh. And, instead of them outwardly saying, I don't want to vacuum, they're giving you the eyeball roll. So that's a mask, an example of a behavior that's kind of they're using in place of being honest and upfront. So now a mask is, you might have the mask of a student who is frail or ill. I have a headache, poor me, I can't do it. You might have a student who wants to be absolutely perfect rather than doing what they're supposed to be doing. You might have the strong silent type. You might have the good Samaritan mask of the person who wants to help everybody else before they do anything themselves. Another couple of masks here is the invisible one. Certainly in a classroom we see that, where the student is hiding in the back of the class behind their book and they don't want to speak up. The mask of the clown. Okay, if you can think about the Joker, or one of my kids is a total clown and he's always messing around when I ask him to do something, and it's because he doesn't want to do it. He's being a little brat. So I have to tell him, quit messing around and get your chores done. So you might have the mask of not caring. of activity, of outrageousness. I did have a student who was like that once, where everything, oh my God, this is crazy, this is insane. And they just didn't want to do the work. So they were interpreting everything as crazy, crazy, crazy. So those are the masks I want you to watch out for. And just to review, honeymoon period, think of the word infectiousness. You do not have that now in January when the student comes back. So how can you recreate honeymoon period feeling of infectiousness, energy, and excitement when the kids come back in January, February? And think about, feeling cheated and feeling contaminated. Those are the kind of feelings that the kids are not ready to experience when they go home. And when they come back, we want to see that student using their internal and external resources. When I'm stressed, I like to listen to music. I'm going to go to the movies this weekend. I'm going to hang out with my friends this weekend. I know who to ask at the school when I need help. So those are great things for the kids to be saying. That's showing you that they're using the resources. Now, you may end up as a host family having conversations with your student now that are things that you resolved before. I thought you liked pizza on Friday. I thought you liked to go bowling with us on Friday. So all of a sudden you might be dealing with issues again that you think were resolved. So those tend to be symptoms of reverse culture shock discomfort. So watch out for those things that the students say. Watch out for the masks. That's the end of my presentation. I'm going to put on the screen here now a sample of some really, really good books to read that would help you with your student. If you have any questions, please unmute your microphone, go ahead and ask me questions, or you can type them in the box at the bottom of the screen on your computer. And I'm going to stay on for another 15 minutes and answer whatever questions you have. So please feel free to jump in. Okay, I don't see any questions at the moment, so I'm going to wait another 5 minutes. If you have any questions, you can unmute your microphone, or you can just type in your question just down below there. The books you see on the screen are just to help you. They're just suggested reading books, but they're very, very good.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your weekend, and thank you for getting up so early on a Saturday.
No problem.
You too.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.